So we've kind of teased it for a while. When Cody Goff was back on the show, what was that, 3 weeks ago when Cody was here? We kind of teased the fact that I would be talking about my Portal router that I received via a Kickstarter project that I had backed. For those that aren't familiar, it's basically a smart route, another router that I was going to try for my house. It's a product designed by Ignition Design Labs. It's a new company, but they have a lot of experience. Many of the engineers that work for Ignition Design Labs come from a background of working at Qualcomm, who you might know from a lot of different wireless products that are out there.
I've never ever used a Qualcomm related product in my life.
Yeah, the modem in your cell phone is probably built by Qualcomm.
Yeah, I'm just joking. I'm joking.
Just saying. So the concept was they were creating a smart router that would solve some problems for people, which is the reason I backed. What was that problem? Severe Wi-Fi congestion. So if you are like me, who lives in a townhouse, or like Cody, who lives in an apartment complex in the middle of downtown Chicago, when you pull up your smartphone or your PC to try and see the Wi-Fi networks around you, you sometimes see 20 to 30 different networks around you. There's all sorts of things out there. They're all operating on the exact same channels into the 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz bands. Well, the Portal router was supposed to help eliminate that problem. And first, a little background. The router is a typical 802.11 AC router, uses the MU-MIMO technology, aka Next Gen Wireless AC or Wireless AC 2.0 spec, makes use of beamforming technology and 9 antennas to send the signal. Now, that's nothing special. Everyone does stuff like that. Their secret sauce is what they're calling their smart lane technology. Now, the smart lane technology makes use of the dynamic frequency channels, or the DFS band in the 5 gigahertz channels. Where might you have heard of DFS before? These channels are traditionally used by airports and weather services, predominantly used for weather radar systems. Some traditional routers are able to use these DFS bands that sit in the 5 gigahertz spectrum, but as soon as legitimate interference is expected, they leave and step you back down to one of the regular channels that every other router uses. Here's where Portal's different with their smart lane technology. They are constantly scanning, so when legit traffic, like that weather radar network, is detected, it takes your network, moves it down to one of the traditional channels, let's arbitrarily call it channel 2. It keeps scanning, and as soon as that interference has gone away for a period of time, it goes, okay, it's safe for me to throw this network back up to, say, channel 38, which sits in that DFS band. I don't think 38's right. I think it's 52, but we'll just call it arbitrarily 52. So it throws you back into that channel. The benefit you get here is you're getting to use channels in the 5 gigahertz spectrum that most mainstream consumer-owned routers don't broadcast in. This is a huge advantage for people that live in apartments or townhouses because, hey, my neighbor next door is not overloading the channel I'm in and causing Wi-Fi interference for me. So I get a much cleaner signal. I get more of my promised bandwidth. Now, this is what they promised. It was a Kickstarter project, so you don't always get what's promised. Let's go and talk my experience with Kickstarter. How did I find out about the Portal router? In fact, I talked to both Suncast and Steven about it when I found out. Lots of tech blogs around CES were reporting Ignition Design Labs Portal saying, hey, this is going to be a real cool product, something we should keep an eye on. So I read a bunch about it. I read up on the DFS channels and I said, okay, I'm going to go check this out on Kickstarter. There were a lot of people that had Kickstarter at that point. I missed the early reward window, but I did back the product. And I think it was $159 I backed to get a router. And for a wireless AC router, not a bad price. I wasn't the only one. When I went and checked the Kickstarter today, just to get an accurate number, they had 4,562 people that backed this Kickstarter project. They brought in roughly $792,000 on this project. And like I said earlier, one of those backers was our very own Cody Goff on this network. He's actually using this router right now.
Hashtag verified Cody Goff. Get it right.
Excuse me. Hashtag verified Cody Goff. I misspoke a little bit. So Cody has gotten it. He has seen some performance advantages. So going into the Kickstarter itself, Kickstarter's really hit or miss sometimes. I know Steven has issues with some Kickstarters. I found this is one of the best Kickstarters that I've been involved in backing before. The team at Ignition Design Labs was incredibly communicative. That's a tough word to say. Pretty much during the entire process of funding, they had weekly updates coming out with here's what we're planning on the router, here's all the kinds of tech we're putting in it. They were regularly answering questions that people posted on their Kickstarter page. It was fantastic. Probably the most communicative Kickstarter project. There you go. That I've ever been involved in. So kudos to them on that. They have had some hiccups, though, once they got into the response period of things. There were some slight shipping delays in the United States as they shipped them over from, where'd they come from? Japan or Taiwan? I can't remember which. I should have researched that a little bit better, but they got delayed shipping them over to the United States. So I was supposed to get this in mid-October. I think it was early November when I got mine. Not a big deal.
No.
The real problem they've had was in the European Union, where everything got redirected to a port in England and then just kind of sat there for a month. So there are many European Kickstarter backers who have not yet received their Portal routers. And if you go to the Kickstarter page for the Portal router, you will see a lot of people that are being angry and acting like children because they have not yet gotten that, cussing out the creators, being like, oh, you guys obviously just ran away with my money. Guys, they did not run away with your money. It has been delivered to many people right now. Shipping issues happen. It's outside their control. All they can do is talk to customs and the shippers and be like, guys, we need to get this moving. So the people that are on their Kickstarter page complaining and be like, you ripped me off, just wait. You'll get your product. You'll really enjoy it. So one of the first things you have to do when you get a router, it's install it. Pretty easy experience for me. When I got that, it came with 2 pieces of paper in there that showed you how to do the install. Literally, this piece of paper I'm holding up with 5 steps, these are the install directions. Power off your modem, plug in the portal to the WAN on the LAN port, wait 30 seconds to power everything on, power up your portal. Wait for it to turn green because it's going to download a firmware update as soon as it connects to the internet. Once it turns green, use our app that you can download from here or go to this URL on your PC to do setup. So I would suggest on setup, download the Portal app ahead of time from your iOS or Android stores so that you don't have to use the data on your cell phone, because when you tear down your network, you'll probably not have any wireless as you're trying to set things up. I think they put that in the wrong order, but honestly, it was an incredibly simple process for me. Total setup time was maybe 10 minutes to get this router set up. 5 minutes of that was the router doing a firmware update as soon as it connected to the internet. Some people did report they had issues installing with an Android phone. I didn't have any problems with my Nexus 6P, but that's an unlocked Android phone, so you're not talking about weird Samsung stuff that's laying on top of the Android kernel and things like that.
True.
It worked well for me. I had no problem. I was going to reboot everything and do it with my iOS iPad, but I was lazy and didn't do it because I'm awesome like that. But set up pretty easy. It uses the Bluetooth on your phone to basically link up to the Portal router, and that's when you set up, here's what I want to call my 5 gigahertz band. Here's what I want to call my 2.4 gigahertz band. I want to set this Wi-Fi password on things. Very easy, very simple in that regard, but not necessarily simple in a bad way. So install was easy. So let's get to the real meat of it. The experience I had with it. So I should give you guys a little bit of background. My router before I upgraded to the Portal was an Asus RT66U. It was codenamed the Dark Knight router by Asus, which I'll be honest is part of the reason I bought it, because it was an awesome name and I needed an 802.11n router.
Of course you would. Of course you would.
I admit it, guys. So I will come out and say right now, this was an 802.11n router. I upgraded to 802.11ac. So there will be some differences on what that wireless protocol allows for bandwidth and for the throughput I get. There is some difference there. Now, one of the problems I've talked about on this show and other shows on my Asus router is everything in the 2.4 gigahertz band was jacked up because I did an Asus firmware update at one point and I could never roll it back to a point where the 2.4 gigahertz band worked. I was only getting about 3 megabits per second, even sitting next to the router on my cell phone on 2.4 gig. So I'd had some issues with that. I was cranky. So I have some screenshots I was going to share with you guys. It should show up on screen here in a second. So this is some tests I did on my iPad. This was before I installed the new router. I was literally one floor up, pretty much right over top of where the old router sits in my living room, sitting on the couch. On my iPad, on the Asus router, I got about 106 megabits per second down and about 12.6 megabits per second up. Pretty respectable. It wasn't terrible. So when I installed the Portal router, I'll show you guys that. On my iPad then, I went to getting about 195 megabits per second down and slightly less up actually, which was a little strange at 11.94, but that's within percent error. So there was a significant increase, part of which can be attributed to being in the wireless AC band, but part of which can be attributed to the fact that I was operating in a channel that no one else was operating in, so there was no interference. So me being me, I decided I need to go and try this all the way upstairs in my house. For some background, I live in a townhouse, and the master bedroom is on the top floor of the house. It is literally 2 floors above where the router sits. I forgot to take a screenshot of what it looked like with the 802.11 in, but I was getting about 80 megabits per second down and about 8 megabits per second up. When I went to go and test it with the Portal router, here's where I got impressed again. About 152 megabits per second down and 12.3 up. Again, significant increases in part because it's an 802.11 AC router, but also because I was operating in channels where nothing else was. So it was impressive to me. I was getting better signal, I was getting better throughput, and I could go to different places in my house, and arbitrarily, where I was getting 2 bars on my cell phone before, I was getting 3 bars of Wi-Fi. So I was seeing performance increases, which was awesome to me. So what I do then, I turned off the smart lanes technology they have. That's basically, like I said, the tool that they have in place that allows you to operate in those DFS channels. When I turned off the smart lanes, I saw maybe a decrease in 10 megabits per second on my download speed and maybe about half a megabit on the upload speed. So not significant losses, but there were losses due to interference around me. So I did see an increase in speed with doing this and working in the DFS range. So from that point of view, it was a success to me. I was very happy with what I got out of that, and I've had no issue with it. Now, there are some people that have complained of issues with their Portal routers. Well, some good news. What Ignition Design Labs did say when the Kickstarter began is you have a year from when you get your router. If you're not happy with it, return it to us and we'll give you your money back. That is something you do not often see on Kickstarter projects. So kudos to them for standing by their project in that regard. So I've had lots of pros. I've talked about how much I've enjoyed a lot of these changes. There were some rough parts, but before I start getting to some of the rough parts, does anyone have any questions for me? Because I've been talking a lot, and I'm sure people
I have one question for you.
Concerns. Okay.
Any change in your wired performance?
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I'd forgot about it. I did actually see a change in my wired performance before. When I was plugged in directly to the ASUS router, I was getting about 125 to 130 megabits per second down on the PC I'm podcasting from right now. Now, when I switched over to the Portal router, somehow I'm getting about 200 megabits per second down now.
Wow.
So I'm not sure. I'm not rated
what's your
to get
cap again? What's your official cap, Chris?
My official cap's supposed to be at like 125. So that's why I'm very curious as to what's going on here. And there was part of me that's conspiracy theorist wondering, do they have some kind of tool in that router that's tricking these speed tests? So I tried it with speedtest.net and a few other sites out there, and the numbers were roughly consistent across the board. Now, give or take a few megabits per second, but that's all within percent error.
That's awesome. Awesome.
It's been a mostly positive experience. Like I said, some cons. This is a very early product, so they're still ironing out a lot of issues. They're doing massive firmware updates about every 2 to 3 weeks, but they've been very good about posting on their website what's going to be coming in there. There's some stuff that's missing, though. If you're a power user or you're just a regular user who likes to prioritize traffic, there's no quality of service rules that exist in this router yet.
Yeah.
So it's a basic thing you see in a lot of things where, in my case, I would prioritize Skype over the other applications on here and prioritize my computer over the other devices on my network. That's not in there yet. I think it's supposed to drop in the update they're releasing either this week or 2 weeks from now. But again,
but that is something that they're planning to do is to add more features like you would see in a traditional router.
Yes, and they have already said that basically we're going to keep rolling these firmware updates out. It's going to be seamless behind the scenes. Your router is going to update itself, and we'll give you notifications of these new things. Quality of service is one of those things. Being able to mesh 2 portals together to create a mesh network in your house is also coming soon. It's not in place. I will have to say their web GUI, if you try to access the Portal router via your browser, it's very, very rough still. It looks like something that was designed in a senior design project back when I was in college. Very rough. It serves
it can't
the
be
purpose.
the GUI worse than the GUI that you get with the Comcast modems.
Yeah, that's probably true. It's very rough and needs refined, but allows you to get into the nuts and bolts and do what you need to. If you're more of a power user, you're going to want to go in that way to do it. You can do almost everything through their iOS or Android app. It works pretty well. You just have to find the right checkboxes to flip to get into the advanced setup mode and control the compatibility modes. Another
I'm
issue.
Curious, Chris. I'm curious. I have CenturyLink, and CenturyLink has actually provided me with a router, and I have fiber optic. And I'm just curious if this router, which is provided by the company, I wonder if it caps off at a certain limit. And if I was to get this router, I wonder if I would start seeing increases in speeds. I don't know. I'm really curious about
that would be interesting to look at with any router. And I will say, I have been talking about this. You can buy them on Amazon right now for $169.
Oh, yeah.
They are available on Amazon
now.
at this point in time.
I know from my perspective with my cable provider, and obviously it's different because it's cable, not fiber. They throttle it based off of device activated on the network. And the reason why I know this is because last year, before I made a full package change there, they offered me a promotional increase, and all they had to do was go in and basically take the modem number and provision it to get an extra enhancement. My bill actually ended up even showing the old package, but they just were able to go and put this little add-on in the system that made it work. And they were just saying that all they do is they just tell the system not to throttle it anymore. So I do think it depends on the provider. Sounds to me like, Chris, maybe your modem or something like that, or maybe it is the router, is being awesome. And I applaud you for that.
Also, in my setup, I do not rent my modem from Comcast. I bought my own modem and went through their setup process online to do that. So maybe that has screwed something up on their end and they haven't capped me out like they're supposed to. I don't know. I did see, like I mentioned earlier, performance increase directly wired into the router. I don't know what that cause is at this point in time, but it's pretty cool to see.
In any case, I think that this is terrific, and I'm really glad to see that you saw such a performance enhancement.
It's a little blue pill.
Right from the beginning of this launch, because I actually give them credit for holding back QoS and stuff like that, because I think that it is a brand new company entering. They are experienced people, but it's a bit of a different idea on how they want to do things. And I think that it's good that they went and they rolled it out early without the QoS, and now they start to add it in, because as we all know, once devices hit the masses, they're going to find things that the beta testers missed. It's going to happen. And I think something like this is really important, because people will, with their routers, they're not stable. The product is giving them problems. They're having to reboot them, or they're being slow, anything like that. They will not give it much grace, because it's the hub of their home. And so they needed to make sure to launch it. And I'm so glad to hear you and Cody have great experience with this, and especially your screenshots, because that is fantastic. Now, the only other thing that I wanted to bring up on here, because you mentioned it to me and I wasn't sure if you're going to mention it, was the DFS device compatibility.
Right. So I had a couple other cons in my notes I hadn't gotten to. I'm glad you brought that up, because Steven was listening to me complain as I tried to troubleshoot things. So here's something that happened, and it's not necessarily a knock on Ignition Design Labs, but a lot of things advertise that they'll work in the 5 gigahertz spectrum, but the vendors kind of cheap out and either hard code or limit the channels they're able to hit. So I've run into some problems where when I have the fast lanes on, I can't get some of my devices to connect to the 5 gigahertz network. They'll connect to the 2 gigahertz, no problem, but the 5 gigahertz presents a problem. For instance, I have a Vizio M-Series TV. The M-Series TV will only work with certain DFS channels. Now, I can control that in the portal. When you go into their Wi-Fi, when you go into the app on either iOS or Android, you can go into the advanced settings and go to compatibility mode, and you can put it in compatibility A, B, or C mode, where A limits you to only 2 specific channels in the DFS range, and B limits you to 3 specific channels, I think, or it could be vice versa. And they have done some research on the Portal website to say if you have these devices, put your device on this compatibility mode. My M-Series TV will not connect when the Portal device is using fast lane technology. There's some other research that has been done. Roku's will not connect to any of the DFS channels either. It is not on the Ignition Design Labs team, however. It is a limitation on the hardware and the software on these vendor devices that prevents them from accessing these, because the developers have prevented them from using these channels, because in most cases until recently, there was no Wi-Fi operating in those channels. So there are limitations in that regard. They did say there were problems with Amazon Fire TVs and Echoes. However, I had no problem connecting my Fire TVs and Echoes when the Smart Lane technology was on. So in my use case, I've actually turned off the DFS Smart Lane technology in my house because I saw a minimal signal decrease, and it ensures that all my devices stay on. So ironically, the reason I bought this router, that DFS technology, I'm not actually using right now, but I'm seeing minimal performance issues.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
And I've got actually a new router myself, which I might tease on in a minute there, and it has DFS capabilities, and that's what I ran into as well. Was the first thing that I encountered was my laptop wouldn't pick up DFS. So
yeah, this stuff is all so new.
Yeah,
exactly. So the problem will get solved as it moves forward, and vendors start saying, hey, there are more and more things using these DFS channels. We need to support them. So it's a typical problem that early adopters have is some of your stuff might not work, and it's not a problem with the router. It's a problem with the product that you the products you've purchased in the past, excuse me.
Yeah, and that's fair. You know, we've run into this before. You know, there was a huge problem when we went from B to G. Lots of people have problems with that. So, whatever.
One last issue I have run into, this is just kind of an interesting one with the Portal router in my list of cons. I mentioned earlier, it's constantly radio scanning, basically, to see whether it can stay in the DFS channels or not. The way my basement is set up where I podcast from and where all the equipment's set up is there is a microwave cart literally behind my computer I'm podcasting on. I can almost reach out and touch the microwave cart in which this router sits. I have found out that when I have the speakers on my desktop computer, I can hear it scanning through the DFS channels, much like on old GSM phones on speakers, you could sometimes hear the interference. I do get that on my computer speakers. It is very quiet. Here's where it gets interesting, though. The speakers I have plugged in right now, they're probably 15 plus years old. I've had them forever. They're beat to hell. The cables are all jacked up and stuff, and it's being held together with electrical tape and a bunch of other stuff. I have a Surface Pro sitting here I use as a soundboard that I also have speakers plugged into that are slightly newer. They're Amazon basic speakers that I paid like $8 for, USB powered, nothing crazy. When I have those turned on and I'm watching Netflix on this Surface Pro while I work on something, absolutely no interference on those. So I'm starting to think it could be just a matter of my speakers are beat to hell and jacked up that I'm using with this. So you might have issue with that. I did test with all my podcasting gear though to ensure that the interference I'm getting on my speakers didn't carry over. None of my tracks I've recorded, you get that noise in the background that you get from the scanning you would normally associate with a GSM phone or the scanning they're doing of the DFS bands. So it's interesting. It's mildly annoying. And I bet if I moved my router, say about 3 or 4 feet further away from my desk, it would probably be less problematic because my speakers are one speaker's pretty much right up on this router right now. So
could be interesting,
not necessarily a problem, but kind of funny. And Dane's asking, how's that noise go again? I'm sure Steven will record it and make it a bump of some kind, much like JS's noise.
Just do it one more time. Come on.
Do it.
I don't even remember how I did it. That's the problem why I was trying to get out of it.
That's funny.
It kind of sounded like a little bit like Peter Griffith there for a minute.
Yeah. So thanks very much for reviewing that on here. I'm very excited again that you had such good experience with it. And it's good to see another company come into things and actually have success, because I have had enough of the big companies putting out piss poor products. And they don't have to be. I am sick and tired of it.
Ironically, a lot of people are getting out of it. Side note, Apple's getting out of the Wi-Fi and router business now. I don't know if you guys had seen. So it's
the brands I'm talking about. You know the brands I'm talking about that put out the
Linksys
home level stuff that is nothing but problems, that you return 3 of them before you find one that actually works.
Walmart.
Yeah, exactly. But that's awesome. And let's go ahead and move on to our last segment of the night, which is the highlight from the website.